Let me get straight to the point. James Gunn's Superman reboot, the film that was supposed to launch the brand new DC universe, has officially failed. Warner Brothers and DC Studios seems like they're in panic mode after the abysmal 600 million worldwide gross and a fandom that's been divided pretty much 50-50. Because looking at my like to dislike ratio for the videos I make about James Gunn's Superman, I can assure you that a big chunk of the audiences apparently agree with me and that they did not enjoy the film. A lot of people clearly loved it and more power to them. But to those who talk about it as if it's the most revolutionary superhero film ever made, like it's the second coming of the Dark Knight or something, well, I guess you saw a different film than I did. But for all our debates and endless conversations about which Superman is better, the fact still remains that if a film, which needs 800 million to break even, makes 600 million instead, it can't be looked at as a win from any perspective. I've seen a sentiment online where fans of Gunn state that even though the film didn't do particularly great financially, this was James Gunn's way of winning the trust of the audiences back with a good project after the train wreck that the DCEU was. But after such a mid-reception and a lackluster box office run, the question is, did he even succeed? Not really.
That's the savory answer.
Yeah, so what is the real answer?
No, he did not. Add to that the fact that it's already on HBO Max after being in the theater for a laughable 35 days, to which James Gunn gave the most denial-fueled response I've heard in Hollywood, where he said, well, it's very complicated. But the truth is that it's because of Peacemaker. I originally thought Peacemaker was going to be coming out next month. There was a lot of things that are beyond our control. So Peacemaker is coming out now. And at the end of the day, I wanted everyone to be able to see Superman, even those people who couldn't get to a theater before Peacemaker, and that's really the reason for it. Yeah, absolutely. It had nothing to do with the fact that the so-called people weren't showing up and the theaters were practically empty.
Stop the cap!
More like stop the cope. So according to his statement, they would have still the film out on digital if Superman was continuing its march towards $1 billion, or at least making tens if not hundreds of millions of dollars every week, right? I think it's pretty gimmicky of Gunn to even say that instead of taking the L on the chin and moving on with the rest of the DCU. But they're not gonna accept the truth, which is that the film has indeed failed. Another thing that the statement kind of hinted on is that after the film's evident collapse, Gunn has clearly lost power and influence over the studios. Because not too long ago, Gunn had absolute control over the entire DCU and its schedule, but now he can't even postpone Peacemaker's release by a couple of weeks or a month. Well, sounds like there's trouble in paradise. And as critically successful as Peacemaker has and will continue to be, it's still a B-tier show about a C-tier character, which fans might watch for John Cena's incredible performance, but as far as the cinematic universe goes, frankly speaking, little progress has been made towards having an overarching storyline, which by the way has been missing since day one. Because one thing fans and perhaps even James Gunn seems to not realize is that the flagship project of any cinematic universe is supposed to establish some kind of a narrative which then piques fans' interests to watch the current film and the next one. So I asked the hardcore supporters of Superman 2025, please explain to little old me what the aforementioned narrative was. Who's the big baddie? What about perhaps some hint towards how the film's story or ending affects the overall DC universe? Okay, at least they could have told us about the history of this new world Gunn has created and how it's full of mystery. At least they could have given us pointers about who the gods and monsters are supposed to be. Nothing? Okay. And the worst part is that Superman 2025 wasn't even great as a standalone movie because it started off weirdly in the middle of an ongoing timeline, gave us a Superman who needs to tell the bad guy how human he is.
I'm as human as anyone.
And he clearly killed a few people. I mean, falling from that height with or without a helmet, they should be dead, right? No, this Superman can't kill people even if he lasers their tits off. Oh yeah, Luthor crying like a little bitch after losing to Soups and being roughed up and pissed upon by the dog was something, wasn't it? Ooh, really makes him look so dangerous. And everyone and their grandpas have access to multiversal cutting-edge technology, which just conveniently pops up as and when the narrative requires. Speaking of the multiverse, I think it's very evident by the current state of the MCU that getting into the whole alternate realities thing would be a terrible idea. Now this new season of Peacemaker might just explain some plot points and maybe establish a collective story arc, but then again, there are two big issues. The first is something that I've been saying repeatedly since James Gunn's Superman came out. If people aren't paying to watch The Last Son of Krypton, the very poster boy of the brand, what hope is even there for lesser known characters who are showing up on HBO Max of all places? Speaking of the streaming service, we get to what is the second problem. Even if there's a narrative being established in Peacemaker, the first thing that people need to do to even be excited for said narrative, which should technically carry over in the upcoming films, is actually watch the show. And since HBO Max isn't available in some major Asian territories, the same ones where Superman was already not that popular, but other superheroes, especially the MCU, is. The end result seems to be an early franchise demise. The fact is that the film only made about 5% change of its money from Asia, while the combined international market still contributed to a massive 40% plus to the box office revenue of Superman, which means it's still an untapped territory for the DCU. Because on the other hand, movies like Avengers, Infinity War and Endgame made about 30% plus of their entire gross from the same markets, which means some key Asian sectors are a big part of the revenue for at least the superhero genre, but the people who live there don't even have access to WB streaming services. I still find it baffling and ridiculous that HBO Max isn't available in China and India, and I've been looking out if it's finally been made accessible to us folks since Zack Snyder's Justice League days, and the service itself launched in 2020, which means it's been well over 4 to 5 years and yet they haven't arrived. This genuinely makes me wonder, is WB even really interested in making money? Oh, speaking of money, there's one comparison that I'm sick and tired of, where people are drawing parallels between James Gunn's Superman 600 million gross and Man of Steel 670 million, or even worse, Iron Man 1's 585 million total. Yup, there's another clan out there which is just as delusional as the Snyder cultists, who actually think that the film's slightly higher gross is good news somehow. And while the Man of Steel comparison itself makes little sense, especially if you take inflation and the number of tickets sold into account, the Iron Man analogy is what convinced me that some people are just beyond reason. And yet, I ask if beating a film which is 17 years old with a 40% lower budget about a B-tier character from a then failing studio is somehow a victory. That's like beating an 85-year-old former running champion in a sprint by half a second and calling yourself the new king. Like, what the fuck? So no, it's not good. If anything, the DC studio should be alarmed, as they seem to be, because the entire planned DCU timeline is now being shuffled in a hurry, as they seem to have cancelled or postponed many of the projects like The Authority and Sergeant Rock to accommodate and fast track more big name projects which has a fan base of actual ticket paying audiences, such as the Batman Part 2 and Batman again in DCU's Brave and the Bold storyline. Yeah. Well, by the sheer number of projects based on The Dark Knight that are slated to release in the next 5 years, I have a hunch that the whole IP is about to become very stale very fast. I guess even the Caped Crusader has its limits. I mean, how many times can he save DC's ass? Because saving is something it sorely needs. And they've also announced a sequel to the Superman film which is slated to release in 2027, which means production will begin shortly. And I think it's evident to most people living in the real world that the DCU is off to a pretty bad start. That's it for today, folks. I'll be waiting for the Gunners to dislike this video as soon as they see the title or thumbnail while I go eat strawberry pancakes.